Lucas Sterling had lived a life where every desire was one phone call away, every dream, one signature from reality. Yet the night he met a modest schoolteacher at a child's birthday party, the billionaire who thought he had everything discovered what it meant to have nothing, until he had her. The Hamptons' estate glittered under the evening lights like something from a fairy tale, which was exactly what Marcus Thompson had intended for his 8-year-old son's birthday celebration. Lucas Sterling arrived fashionably late, as was his custom, expecting the usual gathering of Manhattan's social elite, beautiful people making beautiful conversation, while their children played under the watchful eyes of hired entertainers and nannies. At 29, Lucas had attended thousands of such events, each one blending into the next in a kaleidoscope of champagne, laughter, and the kind of effortless luxury that money could buy and breeding could perfect. He was the heir to Sterling Industries, a global empire built on real estate, technology, and investments that had made his family name synonymous with wealth and power for 3 generations. But more than his fortune, Lucas was known for his charm, his devastating good looks, and his complete inability to commit to any woman for longer than a few months. The tabloids called him Manhattan's most eligible bachelor, and society pages chronicled his romantic adventures with the kind of breathless fascination usually reserved for Hollywood. Royalty Lucas had never minded his Playboy reputation because it was largely accurate. He enjoyed the company of beautiful, sophisticated women who understood that relationships with him came with expiration dates and generous parting gifts. He lived in a world where everything was temporary. Everyone was replaceable and emotional attachments were liabilities that interfered with the freedom that money could buy, which was why nothing could have prepared him for the moment he saw. Her Jenna Wright was kneeling on the manicured lawn, helping a small girl untangle a ribbon that had become wrapped around a chair leg. Her dark hair had escaped from whatever style she had attempted that morning, falling in soft waves around a face that was pretty in the most natural, unadorned way Lucas had ever seen. She wore a simple sundress that probably cost less than what he spent on breakfast, and when she looked up to smile at the child she was helping, her entire face lit up with such genuine warmth that Lucas felt something shift inside his chest. She was ordinary in every way that mattered to his usual social circle. No designer clothes, no perfectly sculpted features courtesy of Manhattan's best cosmetic surgeons, no air of calculated sophistication that marked the women who usually caught his attention. But as Lucas watched her laugh at something the child whispered in her ear, he realized that ordinary had never looked so extraordinary. "Earth to Lucas," Marcus said, appearing at his elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Who is she?" Lucas asked, nodding toward Jenna without taking his eyes off her. Marcus followed his gaze and smiled. "That's Jenna Wright. She's Tommy's 3rd-grade teacher. She volunteered to help with the party when she heard we were short on adult supervision. A schoolteacher." Lucas tried to process this information, to fit it into his understanding of the world where everyone he met was connected to his social circle through business. Family or mutual acquaintances worth millions of dollars. "She's beautiful," Lucas said, the words escaping before he could analyze whether saying them was wise. "And completely off limits," Marcus warned, his tone carrying the weight of a man who knew his friend's reputation with women. "Jenna's not like the women you usually date, Lucas. She's kind, genuine, and believes in things like love and commitment and building a life with someone who shares her values." But Lucas was no longer listening to Marcus's well-intentioned warnings. He was watching Jenna organize a game for the children, her natural authority and gentle patience creating order from chaos with the kind of ease that spoke of genuine skill and deep affection for her young charges. When she laughed at something one of the children said, the sound carried across the lawn like music, and Lucas felt something he had never experienced in his adult life. The absolute certainty that he was looking at the most important person in the world, even though he didn't even know her last name. "Introduce me," Lucas said, his voice carrying the quiet determination that had built his business empire and conquered every challenge he had ever faced. "Lucas," Marcus began, but Lucas was already walking across the lawn toward the woman who had just changed everything about his understanding of what he wanted from life. "Miss Wright," Lucas said, approaching the group of children who were hanging on Jenna's every word as she explained the rules of some elaborate game involving treasure hunting and teamwork. Jenna looked up at him, her brown eyes curious and polite but showing none of the immediate recognition or calculated interest that Lucas was accustomed to seeing in women's faces when they realized who he was. "Hello," she said simply, her voice warm but reserved. "Are you here for the party?" "I'm Lucas Sterling," he said, offering his hand in greeting. "Marcus is my oldest friend." "Jenna, right?" she replied, shaking his hand briefly before turning her attention back to the children. "We were just about to start our treasure hunt. Would you like to join us?" The invitation was polite, inclusive, and completely devoid of the flirtation or strategic positioning that usually accompanied his interactions with attractive women. Jenna was treating him like any other parent or family friend who might want to participate in children's activities, and Lucas found her lack of special attention both refreshing and slightly bewildering. "I'd love to," he heard himself saying, even though he had never voluntarily participated in children's games in his entire adult life. What followed was the most unexpectedly enjoyable hour Lucas had experienced in years. Jenna had created an elaborate treasure hunt that challenged the children to work together, solve puzzles, and help each other overcome obstacles. She managed the chaos with patience and humor, encouraging shy children to participate while gently redirecting the more boisterous ones toward cooperation rather than competition. Lucas found himself genuinely impressed by her skill as a teacher and her natural ability to connect with children in ways that brought out their best impulses. But more than her professional competence, he was captivated by the way she approached everything with such genuine joy, as if helping children find hidden treasures in a millionaire's garden was the most important thing in the world. When the treasure hunt concluded with every child having found something special, Jenna gathered them in a circle to share their discoveries and celebrate their teamwork. Lucas watched from the edge of the group, struck by how naturally she had created a sense of community and shared accomplishment from what could have been just another party activity. "Thank you for helping," Jenna said to Lucas as the children scattered toward other activities. "They had such a wonderful time." "Thank you for including me," Lucas replied, meaning it more than he had meant anything in recent memory. "You're an incredible teacher." Jenna's smile was pleased but modest. "I love what I do. There's nothing more rewarding than watching children discover what they're capable of achieving." Lucas found himself wanting to continue the conversation, to learn more about her thoughts on education, children, life, anything that would keep her talking and give him more opportunities to study the play of expressions across her face. But before he could formulate another question, Marcus appeared to claim his attention for introductions to other party guests, and Jenna excused herself to check on the refreshment table. Lucas spent the rest of the evening trying to concentrate on conversations with business associates and family friends, but his attention kept drifting to wherever Jenna was in the garden. He watched her help serve cake, organize cleanup activities, and say goodbye to the children with the kind of individual attention that made each child feel special and remembered. When she finally prepared to leave, Lucas realized that she was planning to walk to the train station rather than call for a car or rideshare. "Let me give you a ride," he offered, intercepting her path toward the front gate. "That's very kind," Jenna replied, "but I don't want to inconvenience you. The train station is only a few blocks away." "It's no inconvenience," Lucas insisted, already calculating how he could extend the short drive into a longer conversation. "I was heading back to the city anyway." Jenna studied his face for a moment, her expression suggesting that she was weighing the wisdom of accepting rides from virtual strangers, even ones who were friends of her student's family. "All right," she said finally. "Thank you." The drive to the train station took exactly 12 minutes, during which Lucas learned that Jenna had been teaching for 5 years, lived in a small apartment in Queens, and had never traveled outside the United States, despite dreaming of seeing Europe someday. She answered his questions with friendly openness but asked very few in return, seemingly content to let comfortable silence fill the spaces between conversation. When they arrived at the station, Lucas found himself reluctant to let the evening end. "Would you like to have dinner sometime?" he asked, the words emerging before he had fully considered the wisdom of pursuing someone so completely outside his usual sphere. Jenna paused with her hand on the door handle, her expression cycling through surprise, consideration, and something that might have been polite regret. "That's very sweet," she said carefully. "But I don't think that would be a good idea." "Why not?" Lucas asked, genuinely curious about her reasoning. Jenna's smile was kind but firm. "Because we live in very different worlds, Mr. Sterling. And I've learned that those differences usually matter more than people want to admit at the beginning." Before Lucas could respond to this unexpected rejection, Jenna had stepped out of the car and disappeared into the train station, leaving him alone with the unfamiliar experience of wanting something he couldn't simply acquire through money, charm, or determination. How could a woman so ordinary to the world feel extraordinary to him? For the first time in his adult life, Lucas Sterling couldn't stop thinking about a woman who had made it clear she wasn't interested in him. Jenna Wright haunted his thoughts with an persistence that interfered with his ability to concentrate on business meetings, social obligations, and the usual pursuits that had previously consumed his attention. He found himself researching her school, learning about the challenges facing public education, and the economic pressures that made teaching one of the most undervalued professions in society. He discovered that Jenna's school served a diverse population of students from working-class families, that resources were limited, and that teachers like her often spent their own money to provide supplies and experiences that their students needed but the budget couldn't afford. The research led to action in ways that Lucas didn't entirely understand but couldn't resist pursuing. Sterling Industries began making anonymous donations to educational initiatives, funding after-school programs, and supporting teacher development workshops. Lucas told himself that these philanthropic efforts were simply good corporate citizenship, but he knew that his sudden interest in educational causes was entirely connected to wanting to understand the world that shaped Jenna's daily experiences. More directly, he began orchestrating opportunities to see her again, using his friendship with Marcus as an excuse to involve himself in activities where their paths might naturally cross. Tommy's been talking about how much he enjoyed having his teacher at his party. Lucas mentioned to Marcus during their weekly tennis game, "Maybe we should do something nice for her classroom as a thank you." "That's thoughtful," Marcus replied, though his expression suggested suspicion about Lucas's motivations. "What did you have in mind?" "I don't know," Lucas said casually. "Maybe we could visit the school, see what they need, make a donation that would really make a difference." Marcus studied his friend's face with the accuracy that came from 20 years of friendship. "This wouldn't have anything to do with the fact that you've been asking questions about educational funding and teacher salaries for the past 2 weeks, would it?" "I'm developing an interest in philanthropy," Lucas replied, which was technically true even if it didn't fully explain his motivations. "Lucas," Marcus said carefully, "I know you're intrigued by Jenna, but she's not someone you can charm and then discard when you get bored. She's a good person who deserves better than being another entry in your romantic resume." "Who says I'm planning to discard her?" Lucas asked, surprising both Marcus and himself with the vehemence in his voice. Marcus's expression shifted from concern to something approaching alarm. "Lucas, please tell me you're not developing actual feelings for someone completely outside your world, because that never ends well for anyone involved." But Lucas was no longer interested in Marcus's practical warnings. He was focused on the growing certainty that Jenna Wright was the most important person he had never met, and that everything about his life felt incomplete without her in it. The school visit was arranged for the following week, ostensibly as a routine charitable contribution from Sterling Industries to support educational excellence. Lucas arrived with a check that would fund classroom supplies for the entire school year, and a genuine curiosity about seeing Jenna in her professional environment. Lincoln Elementary School was nothing like the private institutions Lucas had attended or the upscale social venues where he usually encountered women. The hallways were worn but clean, decorated with student artwork and displays celebrating academic achievements that spoke of limited resources but unlimited dedication on the part of teachers and staff. Jenna's classroom was warm and welcoming, organized with the kind of thoughtful attention to detail that created an environment where learning could flourish despite budget constraints. Student desks were arranged to encourage collaboration. Walls were covered with educational posters and examples of student work, and every corner seemed designed to make children feel valued and supported. "Mr. Sterling," Jenna said when the principal introduced them, her professional politeness masking any surprise she might have felt about his appearance at her school. This is very generous of your company." "It's an honor to support the work you're doing," Lucas replied, meaning it more than she could possibly understand. "Your students are lucky to have you." Lucas spent the next hour observing Jenna teach a math lesson that transformed abstract concepts into engaging activities that had every student actively participating. She moved through the classroom with natural authority and genuine affection for her students, encouraging questions, celebrating small victories, and maintaining the kind of positive learning environment that made education feel like an adventure rather than an obligation. Watching her work was mesmerizing, in ways that had nothing to do with physical attraction and everything to do with witnessing someone who had found their true calling and was pursuing it with passion, skill, and complete dedication. "She's something special," the principal commented quietly as they watched Jenna help a struggling student understand a particularly challenging problem. "Yes, she is," Lucas agreed, his voice carrying depths of feeling that surprised him with their intensity. After the official visit concluded, Lucas lingered in the hallway outside Jenna's classroom, hoping for a few minutes of private conversation. When she emerged from gathering her materials for the day, he was waiting with what he hoped was a casual expression. "Thank you for letting me observe your class," he said. It was educational in the best possible way. "You're welcome," Jenna replied, though her tone suggested she was still puzzled by his interest in elementary education. The children were excited to meet someone who supports their school. "Would you let me support more than just the school?" Lucas asked, the words emerging before he could analyze whether they were wise. Jenna's expression became guarded. "I'm not sure what you mean. I mean, would you let me take you to dinner, help you plan field trips for your students, contribute to educational causes that matter to you?" Lucas said, his usual smooth confidence replaced by something that felt more like desperation. "I mean, would you let me be part of your world in whatever way you're comfortable with?" Jenna studied his face, her intelligent eyes searching for motivations he wasn't sure he could explain even to himself. "Mr. Sterling," she said carefully, "I appreciate your generosity to the school, but I don't think it would be appropriate for us to have a personal relationship." "Why not?" Lucas asked, genuinely wanting to understand her reasoning. "Because you're you," Jenna replied, as if that explanation should be sufficient. "And what exactly does that mean?" Jenna's smile was kind but firm. "It means you're Lucas Sterling, heir to a business empire, featured on magazine covers as Manhattan's most eligible bachelor, known for dating supermodels and society heiresses. And I'm a third-grade teacher who lives in a one-bedroom apartment and shops at discount stores." "None of that matters to me," Lucas said immediately. "It matters to everyone else," Jenna replied, "and eventually, it would matter to you too." Before Lucas could argue with her assessment, Jenna had gathered her bags and headed toward the school exit, leaving him alone in a hallway decorated with children's artwork and the growing realization that winning her heart was going to require strategies he had never needed to develop. For the first time in his life, Lucas Sterling wasn't being chased, he was doing the chasing. Jenna Wright's life followed rhythms that had nothing to do with stock markets, social seasons, or the complex negotiations that governed Lucas's daily existence. She woke at 6:30 each morning in her small Queens apartment, prepared lessons over coffee and toast, and arrived at school by 7:15 to ensure that her classroom was ready for the day's learning adventures. Her evenings were spent grading papers, planning activities, and pursuing simple pleasures that cost little money but provided genuine satisfaction. Reading library books, talking with neighbors, volunteering at the local community center where she helped adults improve their literacy skills. It was a life of purpose and modest contentment, unmarked by luxury but rich in meaning and human connection. Jenna had chosen teaching because she believed in the power of education to transform lives, and she had built her existence around values that prioritized service over profit, community over status, and authentic relationships over strategic advantages, which was why Lucas Sterling's sudden appearance in her carefully ordered world felt like a storm that threatened to disrupt everything she had worked to build and protect. The flowers began arriving at her school the Monday after his classroom visit. A single sunflower, delivered without explanation or identifying card. Jenna found it cheerful but puzzling, assuming it was perhaps a thank you gesture from a student's family, or a random act of kindness from someone who wanted to brighten a teacher's day. Tuesday brought a small potted plant, something green and thriving that would add life to her classroom. Wednesday delivered a box of high-quality art supplies, the kind that her budget could never accommodate, but that would allow her students to create projects beyond their usual construction paper limitations. By Thursday, when gourmet coffee appeared in the teacher's lounge along with pastries that clearly came from an expensive bakery, Jenna began to suspect that someone with significant resources was making anonymous contributions to her daily life. The suspicion became certainty on Friday when she discovered that the broken copier in her classroom had been replaced overnight with a state-of-the-art machine that would allow her to create materials she had only dreamed of producing for her students. "You have any idea who might be doing this?" her principal asked during their weekly check-in meeting. "I have a theory," Jenna replied grimly, "but I'm hoping I'm wrong." Her theory was confirmed that evening when Lucas Sterling appeared outside her apartment building as she returned from her volunteer literacy session at the community center. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of exasperation and resignation, "I was wondering when you'd reveal yourself." "I don't know what you mean," Lucas replied, though his expression suggested he knew exactly what she meant and was pleased that she had connected the anonymous gifts to his interest in improving her daily life. "The flowers, the supplies, the copier," Jenna enumerated. "Did you really think I wouldn't figure out that Manhattan's most eligible bachelor was playing secret benefactor to a queen schoolteacher?" Lucas's smile was unrepentant. "I thought you might appreciate having resources that would help your students learn more effectively." "What I would appreciate," Jenna said firmly, "is not being the object of some elaborate charity campaign disguised as romantic pursuit." The words hit Lucas like a physical blow, making him realize that his attempts to support her work had been interpreted as condescending, rather than caring. "That's not what this is," he said immediately. "Jenna, I'm not trying to buy your attention or prove my worth through financial contributions. I'm trying to understand your world so I can find ways to be part of it." Jenna studied his face, seeing past his usual polished confidence to something that looked almost like vulnerability. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why is it so important to you to be part of my world?" Lucas was quiet for a moment, struggling to articulate feelings that were unlike anything he had ever experienced. "Because your world makes sense in ways mine never has," he said finally. "Because when I watched you teach, I saw someone who had found their purpose and was living it every day. Because you look at children and see infinite potential, while I look at people and see business, opportunities or social advantages." Jenna felt her defensive posture softening despite her determination to maintain appropriate boundaries. "Lucas," she said carefully, using his first name for the first time, "you can't just decide to adopt someone else's values because they seem more meaningful than your own. Life doesn't work that way." "What if I'm not trying to adopt your values?" Lucas asked. "What if I'm trying to discover values I never knew I had because no one ever showed me that they were possible?" The question hung between them in the warm evening air, weighted with implications that Jenna wasn't sure she was ready to explore. "I need you to stop," she said finally. "Stop sending gifts. Stop making anonymous donations. Stop trying to insert yourself into my life through acts of generosity that I can't reciprocate." "What if I don't want reciprocation?" Lucas asked. "What if I just want the chance to know you better?" Jenna looked at the man who had never been told no by anyone about anything that mattered to him, seeing not the privileged billionaire heir, but someone who was genuinely confused by her resistance to his attention. "Lucas, we live in completely different worlds," she said gently. "You own more cars than I have pairs of shoes. You spend more on dinner than I make in a month. You date women who appear on magazine covers while I grade spelling tests and attend parent conferences." "None of that matters," Lucas insisted. "All of that matters," Jenna corrected. "Because eventually you'll get bored with playing house with a schoolteacher, and you'll go back to your real life while I'm left trying to put my real life back together." The assessment was delivered with such matter-of-fact certainty that Lucas realized Jenna had given considerable thought to the practical obstacles that would face any relationship between them. "What Would it take to prove to you that this isn't a game to me? He asked quietly. Jenna considered the question seriously, weighing her instinct to protect herself against her growing curiosity about the man who seemed so determined to win her attention. Time, she said finally. It would take time to prove that your interest in me is genuine and lasting rather than the novelty-seeking behavior of someone who always gets what he wants. How much time? Lucas asked immediately. Jenna's smile was the first one she had given him that held warmth rather than polite reservation. That's not how it works, Lucas. You can't negotiate a timeline for earning someone's trust. But as Jenna disappeared into her apartment building, leaving Lucas alone on the sidewalk with the scent of her perfume and the sound of her laughter, she found herself wondering if the man who had everything might be willing to give up everything for the chance to have her heart. What if the man she least trusted was the one who saw her most clearly? The warnings began the moment Jenna's colleagues learned that Lucas Sterling had shown personal interest in her life. Fellow teachers who had Googled his name shared what they discovered with the concerned urgency of friends trying to prevent a disaster. He's been linked to half the socialites in Manhattan, Karen Miller told Jenna during lunch in the faculty room. Supermodels, actresses, heiresses, women who make careers out of being beautiful and sophisticated. Last month he was photographed with that Italian contessa at some charity gala, added Patricia Zane, showing Jenna pictures on her phone of Lucas in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, smiling down at a woman who looked like she belonged in a fashion magazine. The month before that, it was some tech executive's daughter who went to Harvard Business School. Jenna studied the photographs with the same analytical attention she brought to lesson planning, trying to reconcile the man she had met with the public image of someone who collected beautiful women, like other people collected art or vintage wines. They all look the same, she observed, noting the common thread of expensive grooming, designer clothes, and the kind of polished sophistication that money could buy and breeding could perfect. Tall, thin, perfectly made up, dressed like they stepped out of magazine spreads. Exactly, Karen said triumphantly, which should tell you everything you need to know about what kind of woman Lucas Sterling usually chooses. You're lovely, Jenna, but you're not a supermodel or an heiress. You're a third-grade teacher from Queens who shops at Target and gets her hair cut at a neighborhood salon. The comparison was meant to be protective, but it landed like a criticism that highlighted every insecurity Jenna had ever felt about her appearance, her background, and her place in a world that valued wealth and status above character and competence. Maybe he's looking for something different this time, Jenna suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. Or maybe he's looking for a new kind of entertainment, Patricia replied. Rich men sometimes get bored with women who are too similar to themselves. They want a change of pace, something exotic and different, until the novelty wears off and they go back to their own kind. The conversation continued through lunch, with her colleagues sharing additional evidence of Lucas's romantic history, tabloid stories about brief affairs, gossip column mentions of spectacular breakups, and society page photographs of him escorting a seemingly endless parade of beautiful women to exclusive events. By the end of the day, Jenna felt overwhelmed by information that painted Lucas as exactly the kind of man she had always been careful to avoid. Charming, wealthy, and completely incapable of the kind of lasting commitment she would need from any serious relationship. But it was the conversation she overheard at the grocery store that truly shattered her growing willingness to consider Lucas's romantic pursuit as potentially genuine. Jenna was selecting produce when she recognized the voices of two women, shopping nearby, Manhattan socialites whose perfectly styled appearance and designer handbags marked them as members of Lucas's usual social circle. Did you hear about Lucas? Sterling's latest fascination? One was saying with the kind of amused condescension that wealthy people sometimes used when discussing the romantic choices of their peers. The schoolteacher? The other replied with a laugh that sounded like tinkling glass. I heard he's been sending her flowers and visiting her classroom. It's actually rather sweet in a slumming sort of way. How long do you think it will last? The first woman asked. I give it 2 months, maybe 3, if she's particularly entertaining in bed. Oh, definitely not longer than that, her companion agreed. Lucas has never been able to maintain interest in anyone who can't match him intellectually and socially. He'll get bored once the novelty of playing Professor Higgins to her Eliza Doolittle wears off. Jenna felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger as the women continued their conversation, dissecting her relationship with Lucas as if she were a temporary amusement rather than a real person with genuine feelings and legitimate concerns about protecting herself from heartbreak. The worst part was that their assessment aligned with her own fears about Lucas's motivations. She was different from his usual romantic interests in every way that mattered to his social circle. Less sophisticated, less wealthy, less connected to the world of privilege and power that had shaped his entire life. That evening, when Lucas called to invite her to dinner at what he described as a quiet little place where we can talk without interruption, Jenna found herself declining with a firmness that surprised them both. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said, her voice carrying the weight of everything she had heard about his romantic history. "Why not?" Lucas asked, and Jenna could hear genuine confusion in his voice. "Because I've been learning about your usual dating patterns," Jenna replied honestly, "and I don't think I'm equipped to be someone's temporary diversion from their real life." "Jenna, whatever you've heard about my past relationships has nothing to do with how I feel about you, doesn't it?" Jenna challenged. "Because from what I understand, you've never dated anyone who wasn't wealthy, sophisticated, and perfectly groomed according to Manhattan social standards. Which suggests that either your feelings for me are fundamentally different from anything you've experienced before, or I'm just an interesting change of pace until you get bored." Lucas was quiet for so long that Jenna wondered if the call had been disconnected. "You're right," he said finally, his voice carrying a weight of honesty that caught her off guard. "You are fundamentally different from anyone I've ever been involved with. But that's not because I'm looking for entertainment or novelty. It's because you're the first person I've met who makes me want to be better than I am." The words were delivered with such quiet conviction that Jenna felt her carefully constructed. Defenses waver despite her determination to protect herself from disappointment. "How do I know that's true?" she asked. "How do I know you're not just telling me what you think I want to hear?" "You don't," Lucas admitted. "You can't know that until I prove it to you through actions rather than words. But Jenna, I'm asking you to give me the chance to prove it." Jenna closed her eyes, weighing her growing feelings against the practical reality of their vastly different worlds and his well-documented history of brief romantic entanglements. "Need time to think," she said, finally. "Take all the time you need," Lucas replied. "But please don't let other people's opinions about my past prevent you from discovering what we could have together." After ending the call, Jenna sat in her small apartment surrounded by the simple life she had built for herself, wondering if she was brave enough to risk her heart on a man the entire world believed was incapable of lasting love. Could a man the world believed incapable of loyalty ever truly love her? Lucas Sterling had never had to prove himself worthy of someone's attention, which made his campaign to win Jenna's trust the most challenging and important project of his life. He approached it with the same strategic thinking that had made him successful in business, but with an emotional investment that was entirely foreign to his previous experiences. The first step was understanding why Jenna doubted his sincerity, which required Lucas to confront the reality of his own romantic history with a level of honest self-examination he had always avoided. His relationships had indeed been superficial, transactional arrangements where both parties understood the temporary nature of their connection, and neither expected emotional depth or lasting commitment. He had chosen women who were beautiful, sophisticated, and completely self-sufficient, partners who enhanced his social status while making no demands on his emotional availability or personal growth. They were perfect for a man who had never wanted to be challenged, changed, or genuinely known by another person. But Jenna was different in ways that went far beyond her economic background or social status. She was curious about his thoughts rather than impressed by his possessions, interested in his character rather than charmed by his reputation. She asked questions that made him examine his values, made observations that revealed aspects of himself he hadn't known existed, and somehow managed to see potential for growth in areas where he had accepted limitation as permanent. The realization that he wanted to be worthy of her respect, as much as he wanted to win her affection, led Lucas to begin making changes in his life that had nothing to do with romantic strategy and everything to do with becoming the man he glimpsed in her eyes when she looked at him with tentative approval. He began reading about educational theory and child development, not to impress Jenna, but because he wanted to understand what made her work so meaningful and effective. He started volunteering at literacy programs, initially to have something to discuss with her, but eventually because he discovered genuine satisfaction in helping adults learn skills that could transform their employment prospects and family relationships. Most significantly, he began declining social invitations that served no purpose beyond maintaining his profile in society magazines, choosing instead to spend time learning about issues that mattered to people like Jenna. Income inequality, public policy, the challenges facing working families in expensive cities like New York. The changes were gradual but profound, marking Lucas's evolution from someone who lived entirely for his own pleasure to someone who was beginning to understand the satisfaction that came from contributing to purposes larger than his own entertainment and success. But it was during a conversation with his grandfather that Lucas fully understood how completely Jenna had altered his perspective on what constituted a meaningful life. "You've been different lately," Edward Sterling observed during their monthly dinner at the family's private club. "More serious, less interested in the social obligations that come with our position in society." "I've been reevaluating my priorities," Lucas replied carefully, unsure how his grandfather would respond to learning about his interest in a schoolteacher from Queens. "Reevaluating in what way?" Edward pressed, his sharp eyes studying his grandson's face with the analytical attention that had built the Sterling fortune. Lucas considered how to explain changes that he didn't entirely understand himself. "I've been thinking about whether the life I'm living is the life I actually want, or just the life I inherited because it was expected of me." Edward's expression grew concerned. "Lucas, the life you inherited is one of privilege, opportunity, and responsibility to carry on traditions that have benefited our family for generations. What could possibly make you question the value of that inheritance? Meeting someone who measures success differently than we do," Lucas admitted. "Someone who finds meaning in helping others achieve their potential, rather than in accumulating wealth or social status." "Ah," Edward said, his tone suggesting that he understood more than Lucas had explicitly revealed. "Someone has caught your attention in ways that are affecting your judgment about what matters in life." Lucas felt defensive on Jenna's behalf, even though his grandfather's assessment was accurate. "Someone has shown me that there are ways to live that I never considered, values that I was never taught to appreciate." "And what values are those?" Edward asked, though his tone suggested skepticism about anything that might challenge the principles that had guided the Sterling family's success. "Service to others," Lucas replied, "making a difference in people's lives through work that matters more than profit margins. Building relationships based on genuine caring rather than mutual advantage." Edward was quiet for a moment, studying his grandson with an expression that mixed concern with something that might have been disappointment. "Lucas," he said finally, "those are admirable sentiments, but they're not practical foundations for the kind of life you were born to live. You have responsibilities to the Sterling legacy, to the business empire that supports hundreds of employees and their families, to the social position that opens doors and creates opportunities." "What if I don't want the life I was born to live?" Lucas asked quietly. "What if I want to build something that feels meaningful rather than just profitable?" Edward's expression hardened. "Then you'll discover that meaning without resources is just poverty with good intentions. Lucas, whatever romantic notions this woman has filled your head with, you need to remember that you have obligations that extend far beyond your personal happiness." The conversation ended with both men frustrated by their inability to understand each other's perspective, but it crystallized for Lucas just how completely his values had shifted since meeting Jenna. The life that had once seemed like a privilege now felt like a prison, and the woman his grandfather would never approve of had become the only person whose opinion truly mattered to him. That realization led Lucas to make a decision that surprised him with its clarity and certainty. He was going to court Jenna Wright not as the heir to the Sterling fortune, but as simply Lucas, a man who had discovered what he wanted most in life and was willing to do whatever it took to earn it. The campaign began with small gestures that revealed aspects of his character, rather than his wealth. Instead of sending expensive flowers, he left handwritten notes about articles he had read that reminded him of conversations they had shared. Instead of offering to take her to exclusive restaurants, he asked if she would teach him to cook simple meals that fit a teacher's budget and schedule. Most importantly, he began sharing stories about his childhood that revealed the loneliness behind his privileged upbringing, the pressure to live up to impossible standards, and the way that money had isolated him from genuine human connections rather than enhancing them. "I never had friends who liked me for who I was rather than what I could do for them," he told Jenna during one of their carefully casual conversations in her classroom after school. "I never had teachers who saw potential in me beyond my family name. I never had anyone who challenged me to be better than I was comfortable being." Jenna listened to these revelations with the same careful attention she gave to her students when they shared their fears or dreams, seeing past Lucas's polished exterior to the man who had never been allowed to discover his own identity, separate from his inherited role. "That sounds lonely," she said softly. "It was," Lucas admitted, "which is why meeting you felt like waking up from a dream I didn't realize I was having. You look at me and see possibilities I didn't know existed. You make me want to deserve the kind of respect you give to people who use their lives to help others." Jenna felt something shift inside her chest as she recognized the genuine vulnerability in his confession. The way he seemed to be offering her not just his attention, but his trust in sharing experiences that revealed his deepest insecurities. "Lucas," she said carefully, "I need you to understand that if this is real, if your feelings for me are genuine, then everything about your life is going to change in ways you might not be prepared for." "What do you mean?" he asked. "I mean that loving someone like me, someone whose life is built on different values and priorities, means choosing those values and priorities over the ones you were raised with," Jenna explained. "It means disappointing people who expect you to maintain certain standards, giving up pleasures and privileges that you've always taken for granted, accepting that our life together would be simpler and quieter than anything you've ever experienced." Lucas considered her words seriously, weighing the cost she was describing against what he had discovered about himself since meeting her. "What if simpler and quieter is exactly what I've been looking for without knowing it?" he asked. "What if disappointing people who only value me for my wealth and status is a small price to pay for earning the respect of someone who sees who I really am?" Jenna studied his face, looking for signs of the doubt or reservation that she expected to find in someone contemplating such dramatic life changes. Instead, she saw determination mixed with something that looked very much like relief, as if Lucas had finally found permission to want something different from what had always been expected of him. "Are you sure?" she asked quietly. "I've never been more sure of anything," Lucas replied, his voice carrying a conviction that made her pulse race with possibilities she had been afraid to consider. If he was finally learning what love meant, was she brave enough to teach him? The school field trip to the Museum of Natural History was supposed to be a routine educational excursion, the kind of learning experience that Jenna organized several times each year to supplement her classroom instruction with hands-on exploration and discovery. She had planned the day meticulously, coordinating with parent volunteers, preparing educational materials, and ensuring that every aspect of the visit would maximize her students' engagement with science and natural history, what she hadn't planned. For was Lucas Sterling showing up as a surprise volunteer chaperone, having somehow arranged his participation through Marcus Thompson without her knowledge or approval? "Mr. Sterling," she said, when she discovered him checking in with the other parent volunteers, her voice carrying a mixture of surprise and exasperation. "What are you doing here?" "Marcus mentioned that you needed additional chaperones for the field trip," Lucas replied, his expression suggesting that he was pleased with his strategic maneuvering. "I thought it might be interesting to see how you teach outside the classroom environment." Jenna wanted to argue with his presumption in inserting himself into her carefully planned educational experience, but the presence of her students and the other parent volunteers required her to maintain professional composure despite her personal frustration with his persistent pursuit of her attention. "Yeah, right," she said with resignation. "You can help supervise Group 3 during our exploration of the fossil exhibits." What followed was the most illuminating day Lucas had experienced since meeting Jenna, as he watched her transform a museum visit into an adventure that had every 8-year-old in her class completely engaged with learning about prehistoric creatures, geological time periods, and the scientific process of discovery. Jenna moved through the museum exhibits like a conductor orchestrating a symphony, guiding her students' attention to details they might have missed, asking questions that encouraged critical thinking, and connecting what they were seeing to concepts they had studied in class. She had an extraordinary ability to make complex, scientific ideas accessible to young minds while maintaining the wonder and excitement that made learning feel like play rather than work. But more than her professional skill, Lucas was captivated by the way Jenna interacted with each individual student, remembering their specific interests and learning styles, encouraging shy children to share their observations, and helping more energetic students channel their enthusiasm into focused exploration. "Miss Wright," one of her students said as they examined a display of dinosaur fossils, "how do scientists know what color the dinosaurs were if all we have left are bones?" "That's an excellent question, Maria," Jenna replied, kneeling down to the child's eye level. "What do you think? How might scientists figure out information that isn't directly preserved in fossils?" Lucas watched as Jenna guided Maria through the process of scientific reasoning, helping her understand how paleontologists use evidence, comparison, and logical deduction to reconstruct details about prehistoric life that aren't immediately obvious from fossil remains. "She would make an amazing mother," one of the parent volunteers commented quietly to Lucas as they observed Jenna's patient teaching. The observation hit Lucas like a revelation, making him realize that he wasn't just attracted to Jenna's intelligence, kindness, and authenticity. He was imagining a future where her nurturing abilities extended to children they might raise together. The thought should have terrified him. Lucas had never considered parenthood as part of his life plan, had never met a woman who made him want to build a family rather than simply enjoy temporary companionship. But watching Jenna with her students, he felt something shift in his chest that had nothing to do with attraction, and everything to do with the sudden, overwhelming desire to create a life with her that would be built on love, partnership, and shared commitment to making the world better for the next generation. During lunch in the museum cafeteria, Lucas found himself sitting with a group of Jenna's students who peppered him with questions about his work, his life, and his opinions on everything from dinosaurs to space exploration. "Do you have a lot of money?" one particularly direct 8-year-old asked him. "Tommy," Jenna began, clearly intending to redirect the conversation away from potentially uncomfortable topics. "It's okay," Lucas said, surprising both Jenna and himself with his willingness to answer honestly. "I do have a lot of money, but I'm learning that having money isn't as important as using it to help other people." "Like how?" another student asked. "Well," Lucas said, thinking about the changes he had been making in his life since meeting their teacher, "money can help schools get better supplies for learning, or help families who don't have enough food, or support programs that teach people new skills so they can find better jobs." Jenna listened to this conversation with growing amazement, hearing Lucas articulate values and priorities that aligned perfectly with her own while speaking to her students with the same genuine respect and interest that had initially drawn her attention to his character. "Miss Wright says that the most important thing is to help other people," one of the students informed Lucas solemnly. "Miss Wright is very wise," Lucas replied, his eyes meeting Jenna's across the lunch table with an expression that made her pulse race. "She's taught me more about what matters in life than anyone I've ever met." The statement was delivered with such quiet sincerity that Jenna felt her carefully maintained emotional distance begin to crumble. This was not the superficial charm of a wealthy man amusing himself with someone different from his usual companions. This was genuine admiration, respect, and something that looked very much like love from a man who was learning to value character over status, purpose over pleasure, and authentic connection over strategic advantage. On the bus ride back to school, Lucas sat with a group of students who had adopted him as their special museum guide, answering their endless questions about everything they had seen and learned during the day. Jenna watched him patiently explain complex concepts in language the children could understand, encourage their curiosity, and demonstrate the kind of natural teaching ability that suggested he would indeed make an excellent father. "He's different from what I expected," Karen Miller whispered to Jenna as they supervised the students' excited chatter about their museum adventures. Different how? Jenna asked, though she suspected she knew what her colleague was observing. Genuine, Karen replied. I expected him to be charming but shallow, using wealth and social status to impress you. Instead, he seems genuinely interested in understanding your world and becoming part of it. Jenna nodded, unable to deny what she had witnessed throughout the day. Lucas had approached the field trip not as an opportunity to demonstrate his resources or sophistication, but as a chance to learn about her work and connect with her students on their level, rather than expecting them to be impressed by his wealth or status. That evening, as Jenna prepared lesson plans in her apartment, she found herself thinking not about the educational objectives they had accomplished during the museum visit, but about the way Lucas had looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, with an expression of such tender admiration that it made her breath catch and her heart race with possibilities she had been afraid to consider. For the first time since meeting him, Jenna allowed herself to wonder what it would feel like to be loved by a man who saw her not as a temporary diversion from his real life, but as the center of a new life he was eager to build around her values, her dreams, and her vision of what love could be when it was built on mutual respect and shared commitment to something larger than their individual desires. For Lucas Sterling, the question was no longer if he loved her, but if she could ever love him back. Lucas had been planning the gesture for weeks, coordinating with event planners, florists, and musicians to create what he believed would be the perfect romantic evening to declare his love for Jenna. The rooftop garden of his Manhattan penthouse had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. With thousands of twinkling lights, exotic flowers flown in from around the world, and a string quartet positioned to provide the kind of elegant musical backdrop that would make the evening feel magical and memorable. He had chosen the setting carefully, wanting to share with Jenna the beauty and luxury that his world could offer while creating an intimate atmosphere where they could talk without the interruptions and distractions that had marked most of their previous encounters. The evening was designed to be perfect in every detail, a culmination of weeks of careful courtship that would demonstrate the depth of his feelings and the seriousness of his intentions. What Lucas hadn't considered was how the very elements that made the evening spectacular might also make Jenna feel overwhelmed, intimidated, and reminded of the vast differences between their respective worlds. When Jenna arrived at his penthouse, wearing a simple black dress that she had purchased specifically for the occasion, her first reaction was not wonder at the beauty he had created, but anxiety about the expense and effort that had clearly gone into orchestrating such an elaborate display. Lucas, she said as he led her onto the rooftop where the lights and flowers created a scene of breathtaking romance. This is incredible. I wanted tonight to be special, Lucas replied, hearing approval in her words and missing the undertone of concern that accompanied her amazement. It must have cost a fortune, Jenna observed, looking around at the professional lighting, the exotic floral arrangements, and the musicians who were playing soft classical pieces that enhanced the magical atmosphere. The cost doesn't matter, Lucas said, guiding her toward a table set with crystal glasses, sterling silver, and china that probably cost more than she earned in several months. What matters is that we have this evening together. But as the night progressed, Jenna found herself feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the extravagance that surrounded them. Every element of the evening was beautiful, perfectly executed and clearly expensive in ways that highlighted the economic chasm between her world and Lucas's reality. The dinner was prepared by a private chef and served by professional waitstaff who appeared and disappeared with discreet efficiency. The wine was rare and costly, the conversation topics carefully chosen to avoid any mention of the practical concerns that dominated Jenna's daily life, and the overall effect was to make her feel like she was playing a role in someone else's fantasy rather than sharing an authentic moment with someone she was learning to care about. This is how you live, she said during a pause in their conversation, gesturing toward the luxury that surrounded them on all sides. This is how I can live when I want to create something special, Lucas corrected. But it's not how I have to live, or how we would have to live together. The assumption that they would live together combined with the casual way he had orchestrated an evening that cost more than her annual salary, triggered every fear and insecurity that Jenna had been trying to suppress since meeting him. "Lucas," she said carefully, "I need you to understand something about who I am and what I can offer in a relationship." "I already know who you are," Lucas replied, reaching across the table to take her hand. "You're intelligent, compassionate, dedicated to making a difference in children's lives, and the most genuine person I've ever met. I'm also a public school teacher who lives in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens," Jenna continued, gently withdrawing her hand from his. "I shop at discount stores, cut coupons to save money on groceries, and consider dinner at Olive Garden a special occasion. This," she gestured toward the elaborate setting he had created, "this is not my world, and I'm not sure I want it to be." Lucas felt confusion and growing alarm as he realized that his carefully planned romantic gesture was having the opposite effect from what he had intended. "Jenna, I'm not trying to change you or pressure you to live differently than you want to live," he said. "I wanted to create a beautiful evening for us, but that doesn't mean I expect you to adapt to my lifestyle, doesn't it?" Jenna asked. "Because this entire evening feels like a demonstration of what life with you would be like, elaborate, expensive, and completely removed from the values and priorities that guide my daily life." "That's not what I meant," Lucas said desperately, seeing the evening slipping away from him and not understanding how his expression of love had been interpreted as pressure to conform to his world. "I think it is what you meant," Jenna replied sadly. "Not consciously, maybe, but this evening is your idea of romance, your understanding of what would make me happy. And it's beautiful, Lucas, but it's not me." Jenna stood from the table, looking around at the fairy tale setting that felt more like a gilded cage than a romantic gesture. "I need to go," she said quietly. "This is all too much, too fast, too different from anything I know how to handle." "Jenna, please," Lucas began, but she was already gathering her purse and preparing to leave. "Thank you for a lovely evening," she said formally, her politeness more devastating than anger would have been, "but I think we both need to accept that we want different things from life." Lucas watched her leave with the growing certainty that he had just made the worst mistake of his life, that his attempt to show her how much she meant to him had instead convinced her that they were too different to build anything lasting, together, alone on his rooftop surrounded by thousands of dollars worth of flowers and decorations that now seemed like evidence of his failure to understand the woman he loved. Lucas realized that winning Jenna's heart was going to require him to give up everything he thought he knew about romance, luxury, and what made gestures meaningful. Would he let her slip away, or prove his love in a language she understood? The week following the disastrous rooftop dinner was the longest of Lucas Sterling's life. He replayed every moment of the evening, analyzing where he had gone wrong, how his attempt to create something beautiful for Jenna had instead convinced her that they were incompatible in fundamental ways. For the first time in his adult life, Lucas found himself unable to concentrate on work, social obligations, or any of the activities that had previously consumed his attention. Board meetings felt meaningless, business deals seemed trivial, and the social events that had once provided entertainment now felt like obligations he couldn't summon the energy to fulfill. Marcus found him in his office on Thursday evening, staring out the window at the city lights without really seeing them, surrounded by financial reports and legal documents that had gone untouched for hours. "You look terrible," Marcus observed, settling into the chair across from Lucas's desk. "I feel terrible," Lucas admitted, his voice carrying a defeated quality that Marcus had never heard from his confident, successful friend. "What happened with Jenna?" Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he suspected the answer might be complicated. Lucas told him about the rooftop dinner, the elaborate preparations that had seemed like romantic gestures but had instead made Jenna feel overwhelmed and pressured to conform to a lifestyle she didn't want. "I was trying to show her how much she meant to me," Lucas concluded, "and instead I showed her how little I understood about who she really is and what she actually values." Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his friend's obvious distress and the lessons that might be learned from his romantic failure. "Lucas," he said finally, "when you were planning that evening, what were you thinking about? What did you want Jenna to feel?" "I wanted her to feel special, valued, loved," Lucas replied immediately. "I wanted to create something beautiful that would show her how important she was to me." "And how did you decide that expensive flowers and private chefs would make her feel those things?" Marcus pressed. Lucas considered the question, forced to confront the assumptions that had guided his approach to courting Jenna. "Because that's how I've always shown people they matter to me," he said slowly. "Through expensive gifts, exclusive experiences, demonstrations of what my resources could provide for them." "And how did those relationships work out?" Marcus asked gently. The question hit Lucas like a revelation, making him realize that his previous romantic relationships had all been transactional arrangements where both parties understood they were exchanging companionship for luxury, status for security, beauty for wealth. They didn't work out, Lucas admitted. They were temporary arrangements that ended when someone found a better offer or got bored with the benefits being provided. "So maybe," Marcus suggested, "the approach that failed in your previous relationships isn't going to succeed with someone who values completely different things." Lucas stared at his friend, processing the implications of what he was saying. "What do you think she does value?" Lucas asked. "Why don't you ask her?" Marcus replied. "But more importantly, why don't you think about what you've learned about Jenna's character, her priorities, her definition of what makes life meaningful?" That evening, Lucas drove to Queens and parked outside Jenna's apartment building, not to see her, but to observe the neighborhood where she had chosen to build her life. He walked the streets she walked every day, noting the small restaurants where she might eat dinner, the bookstore where she might browse on weekends, the community center where she volunteered her time to help adults learn to read. This was Jenna's world. Modest, practical, focused on community and service rather than luxury and status. It was a world where value was measured in relationships and contributions rather than possessions and achievements, where success meant helping others reach their potential rather than accumulating wealth or social position. The next morning, Lucas made a series of phone calls that surprised his staff, his family, and his business associates. He canceled his membership at exclusive clubs he had rarely visited, sold cars he had never driven, and began liquidating assets that served no purpose beyond demonstrating his wealth. But more significantly, he began volunteering at the community center where Jenna taught literacy classes, not to orchestrate another encounter with her but to understand the work that mattered to her and to discover whether he could find meaning and service to others, rather than accumulation of personal advantage. The first evening was humbling in ways Lucas had not anticipated. He was assigned to work with adults who were learning basic reading skills, men and women who had survived decades without literacy, but were now committed to developing abilities that could transform their employment prospects and family relationships. "I never learned to read as a child," explained Maria Santos, a 50-year-old woman who cleaned office buildings at night and was attending classes to help her grandson with his homework. "My family needed me to work instead of go to school. But now I want to read stories to my grandson, help him with his education." Lucas listened to Maria's story with growing admiration for her determination and courage, realizing that she was pursuing education not for personal advancement, but to better serve someone she loved. Over the following weeks, Lucas discovered that working with adult literacy students was more rewarding than any business success he had achieved. The progress was measured in small victories. A student successfully reading a children's book, someone completing a job application independently, a grandmother able to help her grandchild with homework. It was meaningful work that required patience, compassion, and the ability to find satisfaction in other people's achievements rather than personal recognition or financial gain. 3 weeks after the disastrous rooftop dinner, Lucas encountered Jenna at the community center. She was leaving her literacy class as he was arriving for his, and they found themselves face to face in the hallway, lined with motivational posters and student artwork. "Lucas," Jenna said, her surprise evident in her voice and expression. "What are you doing here?" "Learning," Lucas replied simply. learning what it feels like to contribute to something that matters more than profit margins or personal success. Jenna studied his face, seeing changes that went beyond the casual clothes he was wearing instead of his usual expensive suits. "How long have you been volunteering here?" she asked. 3 weeks, Lucas admitted. "Since the night I realized that everything I thought I knew about showing someone they mattered was actually just evidence of how little I understood about what really matters." Jenna felt something shift in her chest as she processed what Lucas was telling her, that he had been quietly working to understand her world, to find meaning in the values she held dear, without any expectation of recognition or reward from her. "Why?" she asked quietly. Lucas looked at the woman who had changed everything about his understanding of love, success, and what made life worth living, gathering courage for the most important words he had ever spoken. "Because I've spent my life calculating odds and managing investments," he said, his voice carrying depths of emotion that made her pulse race. "But you're not an investment or a calculated risk. You're the first person I've ever met who makes me want to be worthy of love, rather than just comfortable with transactions." Jenna stared at him, seeing not the polished billionaire heir, but a man who had been quietly transforming himself according to principles she had never expected him to understand or embrace. "Lucas," she began, but he continued as if he needed to say everything before he lost his courage. "I love you, Jenna Wright," he said simply, "not because you're different from other women I've known, but because you showed me what love actually means. You taught me that caring about someone means understanding their values, supporting their dreams, and becoming someone who deserves their respect." Lucas paused, looking at her with an expression of such vulnerability and hope that it took her breath away. "I know I got everything wrong before," he continued. "I tried to show you I cared by offering you things that meant nothing to you, by creating experiences that felt overwhelming rather than meaningful. But I'm learning, Jenna. I'm learning to measure success by different standards, to find satisfaction in helping others, rather than impressing them." Jenna felt tears gather in her eyes as she realized that Lucas had been quietly proving his love through actions rather than words, through service rather than luxury, through genuine transformation rather than temporary gestures. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling like both a confession and a promise. "I love who you're becoming, who you've always been underneath all the expectations and obligations you inherited." Would she believe him? Or guard her heart until it was too late? 6 months later, Lucas Sterling stood in the community center where he had learned to measure wealth in smiles instead of stock options, watching Jenna organize a celebration for the adult literacy students who had completed their program. The room was decorated with handmade banners and filled with families who had come to honor the achievements of parents and grandparents who had courageously pursued education that would benefit their children and grandchildren. The transformation in Lucas over those months had been remarkable to witness, and even more extraordinary to live through. He had stepped back from the social obligations that had consumed his evenings, choosing instead to spend time volunteering at educational programs, supporting community initiatives, and learning to find satisfaction in contributions that could never appear on a balance sheet. His business empire continued to thrive, but under new management that prioritized ethical practices and community investment alongside profitability. Lucas had discovered that success could be redefined to include positive impact on society, that wealth could be a tool for service rather than just accumulation, and that the Sterling legacy could be about more than financial achievement. But more important than his professional evolution was his personal transformation. Lucas had learned to value quiet evenings over exclusive parties, meaningful conversations over networking opportunities, and genuine connection over strategic advantage. He had discovered that love was not about impressing someone with what you could provide, but about becoming someone worthy of their respect and partnership. "The students want to thank you for all your help this semester," Jenna said, approaching him with the radiant smile that had first captured his attention and now felt like coming home every time he saw it. "They don't need to thank me," Lucas replied, meaning it completely. "Working with them has taught me more about courage and determination than I learned in years of business school." Jenna studied his face, still sometimes amazed by the man he had become since that first meeting at Marcus's son's birthday party. This was not the playboy heir whose romantic history had filled gossip columns, but someone who had chosen love over convenience, service over status, and authentic relationship over strategic advantage. "I have something to tell you," Lucas said, his voice carrying undertones that made Jenna's pulse quicken with anticipation. "What?" she asked, though his expression suggested good news rather than concern. "I've been talking with the school board about establishing an educational foundation that would provide resources for teachers, support for struggling students, and funding for programs that public schools can't afford through their regular budgets," Lucas explained, his enthusiasm for the project evident in his voice and posture. "That's wonderful," Jenna said, genuinely excited about initiatives that could make real differences in children's educational experiences. "But there's more," Lucas continued. "I want you to direct the foundation. I want your expertise, your understanding of what teachers and students actually need, your vision for how education can transform communities." Jenna stared at him, processing the magnitude of what he was offering. Not just professional recognition, but true partnership in work that aligned with her deepest values and most passionate commitments. "Lucas," she began, but he stepped closer, his blue eyes holding hers with an intensity that made the rest of the room fade away. "Jenna Wright," he said, his voice carrying the quiet determination that had first intrigued her. "You changed my life by showing me what it means to live according to principles rather than just pursuing pleasure. You taught me that love is about becoming worthy of someone's respect, rather than trying to buy their attention." Lucas reached into his jacket pocket, withdrawing a simple ring that was elegant without being ostentatious, beautiful without being overwhelming. "I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I understand what you taught me about what matters," he continued, his voice breaking slightly with the intensity of his emotion. "I want to build a life with you that's focused on service, community, and the kind of love that makes both people better than they were alone." Jenna felt tears streaming down her cheeks as Lucas knelt in front of her in a room full of adult literacy students and their families, surrounded by the community where they had both discovered what their love could become when it was built on shared values rather than mutual attraction. "Will you marry me?" Lucas asked, his voice carrying all the love and certainty that had grown between them over months of learning to choose each other above everything else their individual lives had offered. "Yes," Jenna whispered. Then louder, "Yes, absolutely yes." The room erupted in applause as Lucas slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to embrace the woman who had taught him the difference between having everything and having what mattered most, as they held each other in the community center where they had both learned to measure success in changed lives, rather than accumulated wealth. Surrounded by people whose courage to pursue education had inspired them both, Jenna realized that she was marrying not just the man Lucas had become, but the person he had always been capable of being when someone finally showed him that love was about transformation rather than transaction. "I love you," Lucas whispered against her ear, his voice carrying the wonder of someone who had discovered that the best things in life couldn't be bought, earned, or inherited. They could only be received as gifts from people brave enough to love without conditions or expectations. "I love you too," Jenna replied, feeling joy bubble up from a place deeper than personal happiness, from the recognition that their love had become something larger than their individual needs, a partnership that would serve purposes beyond their own contentment. The world still called him a playboy, but to Jenna, he was simply the man who had given her forever.